The North Must Remember, Episode 2 Review. As I mentioned previously, this is a extension, rewrite of Season 8 of Game of Thrones. It's simply the show adaptation rewrite. I would never take anything away from George R.R. Martin and the absolute masterpiece that he hopefully is currently still writing. I would never have the audacity to try to improve upon or change anything he would have written. So this moves forward with the assumption that the show did not end the way George intended. He's had many interviews stating as much, so that's why I guess you could say I had the gall to insert my own ending to this story. So getting back to the review, it starts with video number 13. So Jon and Dany are making some preemptive attacks, trying to melt the Long Lake. All right, a lot of tactics that they would have used or didn't use in the show. I tried to add into my story, simply to show that they were trying to take every possible measure to either try to slow down the army or minimize its impact when they finally arrived at Winterfell. Also in video number 13, we have Jaime's arrival, all right, and immediately has an altercation with Jon. This, I thought, was much more in line with Jon's character, simply because you saw what happened in the show, and his only response was, hey, yeah, we need every man we can get. But that directly contracts Jon's character, because you saw how Jon treated Theon when they first met up, or lastly met up in Dragonstone, right? Jon was pissed, right? And if you would compare, he knows Theon didn't kill Bran. He knew that at the time. So, but he still met Theon with a lot of contempt and anger. So I think Theon's actions pale in comparison to Jaime's, who almost did kill Bran and changed the course of his entire life. So I would imagine Jon would meet Jaime with just as much contempt, if not more. That's where I thought the show really fell short of Jon's character. Alright, moving on to video number 14. Daenerys demands a trial for Jaime immediately. Jaime knew this ahead of time, probably a safe assumption, so he brought a gift, that being the crown of King Aerys II, as well as the wildfire. So, with that being said, Jaime was thinking ahead, alright, was able to anticipate other people's actions, so on and so forth. Alright, so Jaime right now, in my opinion, isn't the only one on trial. The Northerners are probably watching Dany very closely to see how she's going to react to someone attempting to give them aid. The Northerners obviously are going to be completely hell-bent on defending the North itself. If Dany was to overreact, put her own quote-unquote justice above the safety of the North, that could lead to some negatives on Dany's part. So in the show, Dany seems to be a little acting out of impulse, right? So I wanted to show a little more political savvy on her side here. Even though you may not be able to see it by reading it, that was really my intent. Some things seemed to happen to her, but it was really part of a larger plan. So halfway through the trial, she realizes that she's being watched very closely and judged appropriately, and she leaves his fate to Jon. Jon held Theon responsible. Why would he not do the same for Jaime, right? So Jon threatens him with immediate execution. Was more in the character of Jon. You saw what he did to Jon O'Slint, so on and so forth. Jon believes, and was raised to believe in capital punishment and swift justice. Alright, so Brienne vouches for Jaime, Sansa vouches for Brienne, and that what makes Dany give him a reprieve, right? Dany, again, is playing politics with Sansa, right? Dany knows she is likely an assassination target by Jaime, so she neutralizes this threat by threatening Tyrion, right? So Dany knows the only thing that Jaime probably cares about, more than his own life, is Tyrion's life. So she simply puts that judgment against him, that if he is found guilty for any actions in the future, not only will he likely be executed, but also Tyrion will be executed based on Jaime's actions. So I thought that was a pretty smart move of Daenerys to be able to neutralize any assassination plot. Alright, so Bran knows Jaime wants to reclaim his honor. That's my personal opinion, that more important than his love for Cersei is, well, Jaime's desire to regain his honor. So swearing loyalty to Bran is what convinces Brienne that Jaime is no longer tethered to Cersei, and really allows her to pretty much fall for him, simply because he isn't going back to King's Landing now or ever, simply because he wants to regain his honor. Why would he make an oath just to save his own ass and then turn around and break it again? I'm sure that's the last thing Jaime wants to do for a man trying to reclaim his honor, is to make another oath that he knows he's going to break. I just don't see it. Brienne's smart enough to figure that out on her own, so she can pretty much allow herself to care for him simply because he made that oath to Bran. Alright, moving on to video number 15. Yara finds out that Theon has a son and sends Osmond to tell him. Theon had about a 2-day head start. Alright, so I would imagine the audience is pulling for Osmond to get to Theon before the dead do. Not too much to discuss there. Alright, video 16. Jaime and Tyrion discuss Cersei's forehand knowledge of events. Tyrion is informed of Jon's lineage, which I thought was one of my favorite back and forth between between Tyrion and Dany. Alright, Tyrion is able to quickly figure out the best course possible, right? So Tyrion is really able to conclude that Dany loves Jon, and that a marriage between them would keep the kingdoms together. Some might consider this a counter move by Team Dany. I like to think of it as a counter move. But at the same time, Dany thinks she's undermining Sansa. Myself, personally, I think this is exactly what Sansa expected to happen. So she's basically using the knowledge she had to put Jon in charge of not just the North, but the Seven Kingdoms, right? She can't, Sansa knows she doesn't have what she needs politically or physically to keep Dany out of the North, so the best thing she can hope for the North is to have Jon have equal say with Dany when it comes to ruling the North. Again, Sansa's playing the Game of Thrones. Moving on to video number 17, episode 2. Bran watches the Night King freeze the Long Lake, countering the efforts by Jon and Daenerys. Bran addresses his hesitance of entering a White's mind, simply because he doesn't really know if he can get back out. So he's very hesitant to do this. It's kind of trying to set some rules for Bran's ability, which was not done in the show very well. And more or less, it's not a limitation to what he can do physically, it's a limitation of what he desires to do. Arya and Jaime have some tension. She threatens Cersei. That was a late added line. The fact that Jaime kind of got away with hurting Bran, and Arya's not okay with that. But at the same time, it's kind of ironic because of what Arya desires to do to Jaime's sibling, that being Cersei. Another one of my favorite parts, right? So Jaime breaks down and asks Bran, who he accepts as omniscient, to whether or not his child is going to survive the Great War. Not only does Bran inform Jaime that their child will survive, but also reveals the sex of the baby to Jaime. I thought that was pretty good. Alright, video number 18. Missandei teams up with Sam to decipher the Night King's symbols. This was one of those things that just fell right into place. Missandei being an interpreter, speaking something like 19 or 20 languages, the fact that she would recognize the symbols that the Night King left behind. This is a large part of the story. It was in the opening scene. The fact that they left the symbols for the Night's Watch to find, and then a White Walker specifically allowed a man of the Night's Watch to live and let him retreat and go back to the Wall. This is something that's never been addressed. Why did they allow one survivor? Myself personally, I believe the White Walkers are trying to communicate with the realms of men. This is a very, very, very large part of the story, and pretty much the biggest reason why I decided to rewrite it. It was such a huge glaring hole and can be explained so easily. So yes, I believe the Night King is trying to communicate with the realms of men, and that's why he let Will, who was later executed by Ned Stark, why he allowed him to live. Problem is the Night King, or the White Walkers, don't have an easy means of communication, right? Alright, so video 19. So the Dragon Salvo, this is the final video of episode 2. Dragon Salvo, Jon drowns a large part of the army that was on the backside. Most say 90% of it has already crossed the Long Lake. He melted it again and pretty much killed off the back 10% of the army. It was reduced in size, but they failed to delay the Night King's army any longer. Tormund reveals he has a missing daughter who can interpret the Night King's symbols, and the fact that she was sent to Hardhome from Eastwatch prior to Jon mining the Dragonstone. She was trying to recover the Dragonglass that Jon lost at Hardhome. Dany more or less proposes to Jon. She countered Sansa's manipulation, trying to secure the north. Dany thinks she's outmaneuvering Sansa, and that's exactly what Sansa wanted to happen all along. It's actually kind of funny. The lightning I added to the story was simply going to be an aid in Jon identifying that there was an assassin in the room through the flashes of light. And I thought it was kind of funny. At the same time, this is where Dany revealed Jon's lineage to him. I thought this was a lot better doing it this way than the other way around. It allows politics to play a little bit more. And I think Jon is much more likely to believe it coming from Daenerys herself, because there's no benefit to him being a Targaryen, so it's much less likely of it being manipulation. So in the middle of a lightning storm, Jon finds out he's a Targaryen. And this was completely by accident. That's the reason I had the lightning in there, so he could find the assassin. But turns out it's almost like, Jon's being reborn as a Targaryen. Dany was born during a storm, and it turns out in a backdoor kind of way, Jon was as well. Born as a Targaryen during a storm. That was not done on purpose. That was actually a complete accident until someone messaged me on Reddit and said they really enjoyed the fact, the irony there, that Jon was born as a Targaryen during a storm, which actually was not intentional. It was a complete accident. Alright, moving on. So Dany failed to mention to Jon that Rhaegar and Lyanna were married, so Strickland thought he was a Targaryen bastard. Jon then acquires Blackfyre and sets up an emotional struggle of his identity that will physically manifest in which sword he chooses to use moving forward. Alright, really no questions or comments to go over in episode 2. The character review this week or month, whatever, is Sansa. Alright, so one of her greatest influences, in my opinion, were Baelish and Cersei. So it's not far-fetched to think she'd be a major political player. It's kind of forced, doesn't really have too much of the back ability, but this is a late developing ability that I believe she does have, and I think she proved it in Season 8, in the rewrite. So she attempts to blackmail Daenerys, and for the most part, she is successful. The penance for such betrayal of Jon would typically result in stiff penalties for her character. Just see Robb Stark. In my story, Sansa was actually marked for death due to her betrayal. That is the not death by Jon's hand, but just in more of an ironic type of way. In Season 8, we really got away from penance for characters' misdeeds. So I tried, in more cases than one, Sansa would more than likely have a tragic ending based off this betrayal. And that was the plan the entire time. However, she actually got a reprieve for 2 reasons. One, Jon has some very tough decisions he has to make later on in my story. I think if Sansa ended up dying, Jon would not have had the strength to make the decisions that he made. And again, that's a little bit of foreshadowing. I don't want to reveal anything else, but the point is I had to keep Sansa alive, otherwise it would have had too much of an effect on Jon. And then in another case, another unnamed character, no spoilers, Sansa ends up being a positive when it comes to a different character who was basically left with nothing, right? So it was a nice little reward, I guess you could say. So Sansa's actions definitely left her marked for death, but she ended up getting a reprieve simply because I needed her to have an effect on 2 other characters. I'm extremely satisfied with all of the character arcs that finish in this rewrite, with the exception of really 2, Sansa and Davos. Sansa because she isn't necessarily going to be killed off because of her transgressions. And then Davos, I just didn't know what to do with him. I just could not figure out how to incorporate him into the story properly. I think I did okay, but it's just not one of my favorites. There are just so many others. Tyrion, Jaime, Dany, Jon, Theon. They just have such good story arcs. Sandor, Arya. They're all just absolutely incredible, in my opinion. Sansa is definitely featured heavily in the early parts of my rewrite, but then kind of trails off. Hopefully not too many will notice. Again, this is a Season 8, Episode 2, The North Must Remember, Episode 2 review. Again, I would encourage as much criticism as possible. Any questions, please leave comments down below or in the particular video, and I'll be sure to address them as quickly as possible. Thank you much for listening. Please share the show with your friends.